It began with one sentence. A line spoken over a police radio in a small Midwestern city, a line that would ignite weeks of outrage, divide a community, and test the fragile balance of race relations in South Dakota. In the early winter of last year, a Rapid City police officer, Jeffrey Otto, followed a car down a dimly lit road. He told another officer over the radio, "It's a young Native American male driving a really new Mercedes car." That one observation, that one assumption, would soon unravel a career, shake the department, and reopen old wounds many believed had never healed. Because in Rapid City, the words Native American and police have always carried weight. And history has never been far behind. Rapid City sits quietly at the base of the Black Hills, a place many tourists pass through on their way to Mount Rushmore. But behind its postcard-perfect scenery lies a different story, one told through decades of mistrust, racial tension, and painful statistics. More than 11% of Rapid City's population identifies as American Indian or Alaska Native. Many more indigenous people travel into the city daily. For work, for school, for supplies, from nearby reservations like Pine Ridge, one of the most populous in the country. For generations, Native families have come here out of necessity. And for just as long, many have said they don't always feel welcome. It was a November evening when Officer Jeffrey Otto was on duty. He wasn't on a high-speed chase or a call for backup. He was simply driving a young girl to her foster home, a routine task. But somewhere along the road, he noticed a vehicle. Out-of-state plates. A prolonged stop at flashing red lights. Something, he thought, didn't seem right. He began to follow. Moments later, he radioed another officer. He said he wanted to keep an eye on this car because it's a young Native male driving this really nice car. To some, it sounded like caution. To others, it sounded like prejudice in action. Otto continued following until the vehicle turned into a hotel parking lot. Then, he saw the driver step out. It wasn't a young Native American man. It was, as he would later report, a middle-aged Asian guy. Otto radioed again. "All right, so I watched it park, and it's actually a middle-aged Asian guy that got out. So yeah, it's going to be nothing." What might have seemed like an offhand remark soon became a career-ending mistake. Within days, Otto was called into his supervisor's office. He was questioned about the incident, the comment, the follow, the assumption. And then, he was sent home. Less than a week later, a letter arrived. Signed by Rapid City Police Chief Don Hendrick. Otto was fired. The reason? Racial profiling. It didn't take long before the story spread. Locals began whispering, then speaking openly. Another example, they said. Another reminder of the prejudice Native people had endured for years. But this time, the department acted fast. Some said that was progress. Others said it was damage control. City officials were quick to make a statement. Joel Landine, an attorney representing the city, said plainly, "Mr. Otto used an extreme lack of judgment and as a result is no longer employed with the Rapid City Police Department. There is no place for this kind of behavior." Mayor Steve Allender called it swift action. He said it showed that the city was serious about accountability, that Rapid City was changing. But not everyone believed that. To many indigenous residents, the firing wasn't a breakthrough, it was a symptom. Because, they said, this wasn't about one officer. It was about a culture. Monique Muffy Mousseau has lived in Rapid City her entire life. An Oglala Lakota and a former law enforcement officer herself, she's seen it all. The stops, the stares, the suspicion. "You walk up to any Native American here in Rapid City," she told reporters, "and they can give you hours and hours of testimony on how we are harassed continuously." Her words were not unique. Her story was not isolated. Mousseau recalled how, for months, she drove daily between Pine Ridge and Rapid City for work. And nearly a dozen times, she says, officers pulled her over. They checked her plates, ran her license, asked questions, waited, sometimes half an hour, searching for something wrong. It was only after she complained to city officials that the stops suddenly stopped happening. When questioned about those allegations, Mayor Allender pushed back. He said records showed Musso had been stopped only once, and arrested once, for traffic violations. He denied there was any systemic discrimination. His statement was blunt. Because we employ human beings, the mayor said, we are at risk of employing someone who holds bias. Every community in the world has this same risk. But to people like Musso, that explanation felt like avoidance. Because in Rapid City, bias wasn't a risk. It was reality. Jeffrey Otto didn't stay silent either. His attorney, Rexford Hague, came forward, disputing the city's claim. He insisted Otto hadn't racially profiled anyone, because, he argued, Otto couldn't even see the driver clearly. The car windows were tinted, Hague said. You can't racial profile someone you can't see. He added, no one was stopped, detained, or questioned. There was no victim. To Otto, it was a misunderstanding, a misinterpretation turned into a career-ending accusation. Had claimed his client was aware of a recent string of car burglaries and stolen vehicles at hotels, crimes police believed young Native Americans were involved in. That, Hague said, explained Otto's suspicion. But to the public, it sounded like justification, not explanation. Otto fought back, filing a grievance petition with the South Dakota Department of Labor and Regulation. The state reviewed the case, weighing the city's firing against the officer's defense. Months later, a judge ruled that both sides would need to argue their case in a hearing. But before that could happen, Otto withdrew. The city and Otto reached an agreement. The department changed the reason for his departure from racial profiling to lack of judgment. And his record would read, resigned in lieu of termination. The city said it didn't change the facts, just the paperwork. Otto would never work for Rapid City again. And if he tried to join another law enforcement agency in South Dakota, the state would have to review his case first. His attorney called it a scapegoat situation. He said the city had jumped the gun too early, eager to prove it was racially sensitive. Mayor Allender disagreed. He said Otto's willingness to even consider acting on bias made him a bad fit for law enforcement. To understand why this one moment hit so deeply, you have to look back. Far beyond Otto's patrol car, beyond his resignation. For years, indigenous activists have accused the Rapid City Police Department of discriminatory practices. A 2015 study by the University of South Dakota painted a grim picture. Between October 2013 and January 2015, 59.1% of those arrested in Rapid City were Native American. Just 37.1% were white. The report acknowledged that many of the Native arrests were tied to outstanding warrants or probation violations. But to those living it, that detail didn't soften the numbers. Because every statistic was a story, and every story carried the same message, unequal treatment. Activists like Natalie Stites say this isn't just about data. It's about daily life. They start targeting our men really young, she said. A young Native man can't walk the streets without being accosted by police. Means is a member of the Cheyenne River Sioux tribe. She ran for mayor in 2019, unsuccessfully, but her campaign message still echoes today: equality, visibility, and safety for Native people. She believes the criminalization starts early and never really stops. For her, the Otto incident was proof of what she's always said, that systemic bias isn't a ghost story, it's policy lived out loud. Mayor Allender, however, maintains that the department is improving. When asked whether there had been any other cases of racial profiling in the past 5 years, his answer was simple. No cases have been documented or brought to the attention of city officials. He even added, I doubt I go a single week without having positive feedback from Native American community members. To some, that sounded like progress. To others, denial. Because if no one's reporting, is it because the problem's gone? Or because no one believes reporting will help? Not everyone in Rapid City has given up hope. Karen Mortimer, director of the Nuluzahan Okalakisiapi Ambassadors, or MOA, believes change is possible. Her organization has worked since 2014 to repair what she calls a broken relationship between Native and non-Native residents. They've hosted workshops, cultural exchanges, and leadership training. Recently, MOA even merged with the city's Human Relations Commission, the department that handles discrimination claims. Mortimer says the goal is simple: to build trust. "We know that change happens if there's trust," she said. "But we've had 150 years of broken treaties and betrayal. Change doesn't happen overnight." Her words capture the paradox of Rapid City: progress, shadowed by history. Was this about one man's judgment? Or an entire system's reflection? For some, Otto's firing was accountability. For others, it was avoidance, a way for the city to say, "See? We're not racist," without addressing the roots. Because in Rapid City, race has always been more than a statistic. It's in the way people are watched, the way they're stopped, the way they're believed, or not. And when a police officer admits he wanted to keep an eye on someone simply because of how they looked, that hits a nerve generations deep. In public meetings and online forums, the debate raged. Some residents argued Otto was treated unfairly, that he'd been punished for words, not actions. They said it was political correctness gone too far. Others asked why it took until now for an officer to be held accountable at all. Because for years, they said, people like Musso had been stopped, questioned, or followed, and nothing happened. The divide wasn't just about one officer. It was about what the city believed about itself. The question that now lingers over Rapid City isn't about guilt or innocence. It's about trust. Can a community with such deep scars ever rebuild confidence in the people sworn to protect them? For some, the answer is yes. Slowly, painfully, but yes. For others, it's not about trust. It's about survival. Because when bias hides in judgment, even for a second, it can determine who gets stopped, who gets questioned, who gets followed, and who doesn't make it home. In the end, Jeffrey Otto walked away not as a convicted man, but as a symbol of a department trying to redefine itself, and a city struggling to reconcile with its past. His resignation didn't erase the comment. It didn't erase the years of mistrust. And it didn't erase the question now echoing through Rapid City's streets. When does a lack of judgment become something more? When does bias stop being an accident and start being the system? Because sometimes, it only takes one sentence, one assumption, to expose everything underneath. And in Rapid City, that sentence has already been spoken. When the headlines faded, the city grew quiet again. No protests in the streets. No televised hearings. Just the hum of cars along Omaha Street and the winter wind brushing past the murals downtown. But beneath that calm, Rapid City was holding its breath. Officer Jeffrey Otto had resigned. The paperwork called it lack of judgment. The department called it closure. Yet for many, it didn't feel like the end of anything. Because the comment that started it all, a young native male driving a really new Mercedes, had already seeped into something deeper. Something harder to shake. Inside the Rapid City Police Department, there was unease. Some officers felt a chill settle over the precinct. If one sentence could cost a career, what did that mean for the rest of them? Others said the department had done the right thing, finally choosing accountability over loyalty. But for the native community, the firing was not a victory. It was a reminder. A reminder that discrimination had to reach the news before anyone listened. A reminder that silence was still the safest language between the police and those who feared them. Weeks passed. Otto disappeared from public view. No interviews. No statements. No social media trail. His attorney spoke briefly to local reporters, calling him a scapegoat. But Otto himself stayed silent. He didn't return calls. He didn't appear at community meetings. He simply left. In a town the size of Rapid City, vanishing isn't easy. But in this case, the silence almost felt deliberate. As if absence itself was the only defense left. At the same time, inside native neighborhoods, the small homes near Knollwood Drive, the apartment rows off East North Street, the conversation was still alive. At kitchen tables and tribal offices, people asked the same questions. Would anything change? Would the next officer think twice? Or would the next traffic stop end the same way it always had? Flashing lights, uneasy stares, hands gripping steering wheels a little too tight? Because for many, Otto wasn't the story. He was the symptom. Monique Mousseau remembered hearing about the resignation while driving home from work. She said she pulled her car over on the shoulder, just outside the city limits, and sat there for several minutes, angry, relieved, and exhausted all at once. "I knew it wasn't just him," she later told an interviewer. "It's every time someone looks at us like we don't belong in our own town." Her words carried weight. She'd spent decades wearing a badge herself, patrolling the same roads where she'd later be pulled over again and again. Now she watched from the outside, seeing the cycle repeat. The city leadership tried to move forward. Mayor Allender gave brief updates during press conferences, measured, careful, procedural. He reminded reporters that the officer had resigned, that there had been no stop, no arrest, no harm. But that statement, meant to calm, only fueled frustration. To the indigenous residents, no harm missed the point. Because the harm wasn't in what Otto did. It was in what he assumed. Meanwhile, among younger residents, college students, part-time workers, people who'd grown up watching their parents endure the same suspicion, something began to shift. They started talking more openly. On campus forums, at coffee shops, on TikTok and Facebook groups, they shared stories of being followed, of being mistaken, of being questioned for existing. Some posted photos of cracked windshields and citation slips. Others posted nothing at all, just short captions that said, "We know." That quiet solidarity became its own kind of protest. No marches, no slogans, just a shared understanding that they weren't imagining any of it. Inside the department, supervisors attended new cultural sensitivity workshops. The sessions were mandatory. PowerPoint slides replaced patrol reports for a few afternoons. But real change is harder than a training module. Several officers who spoke anonymously to reporters said morale was low. One described it as walking on eggshells. Another called it a lesson learned. But the question lingered, was the lesson about equality or just about caution? By early spring, the snow began to melt in the Black Hills. The city prepared for the tourist season. Hotels filled again, the same hotels where Otto had once followed that Mercedes into the parking lot. Life returned to routine. But routines can hide truths. In many native households, parents still gave their teenagers the same warnings before they went out at night. Keep your hands visible. Stay calm if you're stopped. Record everything if you can. Those lessons weren't born from paranoia. They were born from experience. And as for Otto, his name slowly disappeared from the local paper's headlines. A few weeks later, a brief notice appeared in a legal newsletter, former officer no longer pursuing grievance. That was it. No follow-up. No statement of regret or defense. Just silence. For the department, it was a clean ending. For the community, it was unfinished business. Because in Rapid City, silence has always been part of the story. It's what fills the spaces between apology and accountability. It's what lingers after a press release fades. And for Native families, that silence carries memory. Of arrests that shouldn't have happened, of laughter that turned to fear, of names that were forgotten except by those who loved them. To outsiders, Otto's resignation looked like progress. To those living inside history, it looked like déjà vu. Because they had seen this before, a single incident sparks outrage. The department promises change. Time passes. Nothing feels different. The cycle repeats until the next moment forces the city to look again. Still, some saw opportunity. Community leaders quietly reached out to police liaisons. A few officers volunteered for cultural events on the reservation. Local radio hosts began airing segments on rebuilding trust. They were small steps, fragile, uncertain, but steps nonetheless. Yet every gesture of goodwill competed against generations of harm. And goodwill alone couldn't erase fear. One evening, during a community meeting at the Journey Museum, an elder stood up. He spoke softly, his voice trembling through the microphone. He said, When I was a boy, my grandfather told me that the badge can be a shield or a weapon. Depends on who's holding it. Then he paused. And in this town, too often, we're on the wrong side of that shield. The room fell silent. Even the police representatives at the back lowered their eyes. Moments like that cut deeper than statistics. Because they speak to something no report can measure, the weight of being seen only through suspicion. Outside, as night settled over Rapid City, the lights of patrol cars glowed faintly along Main Street. To most, they were a symbol of safety. To some, a reminder of vulnerability. And between those two meanings, the city's fragile trust balanced like a thread in the wind. Otto's story faded from television, but it stayed in conversation. Every time someone mentioned that officer, eyes shifted, voices lowered, and the room filled with the unspoken question, what happens next time? Because there's always a next time. The silence that followed his resignation wasn't peaceful. It was a pause. The quiet before the next reckoning. By summer, Rapid City looked the same as it always had. Families shopped downtown. Tourists passed through, snapping photos, unaware of what the streets carried beneath the surface. But for those who lived it, the air felt heavier. The wound wasn't visible, but it hadn't closed. And in communities that have carried generations of mistrust, silence is never empty. It echoes. So as the city moved on, as the officer disappeared into anonymity, the question no one wanted to answer remained. If a single remark could expose so much pain, what else still hides in the quiet? Because silence, in Rapid City, is never just silence. It's a memory. It's a warning. And it's only the beginning. When the silence settled, what it left behind were people. Not headlines, not press releases, people. Men and women who still crossed the same streets, still nodded at the same patrol cars, and still carried that small, invisible tightening in the chest each time blue lights flickered in a rearview mirror. For indigenous residents of Rapid City, trust has never been an assumption. It has to be negotiated, daily. Every handshake, every roadside conversation, every stoplight glance becomes a quiet calculation of risk. Monique Mousseau calls it living in two realities. In one, she's an ordinary citizen running errands, going to work, taking her nieces out for dinner. In the other, she's constantly preparing for the moment someone decides she looks suspicious. Her story echoes through hundreds of others. There's the college student whose car was searched 3 times in a single semester. The store clerk followed through an entire aisle by security. The father who tells his teenage son to keep both hands visible even when the engine is off. None of these make news. They make habits. And habits become survival. The resignation of one officer didn't rewrite those habits. It reminded everyone why they exist. At community circles hosted by the NDN Collective, people shared memories, small, specific, ordinary. One woman described being stopped on her way to work because her license plate light was out. She said the officer never mentioned the light. He only asked where she was headed from. She laughed while telling the story, but it wasn't humor. It was the kind of laugh that keeps anger from spilling over. Sociologists sometimes call this racial weathering. A lifetime of minor cuts that eventually shape how a person moves through the world. In Rapid City, that weathering shows in posture, in tone, in how people glance before speaking. And it shows in numbers. Native Americans make up just over 1/10 of the city's population, yet for years they've accounted for more than half of local arrests. Researchers call it disparity. Residents call it routine. The police department insists progress is being made. New training, new outreach programs, body cameras on every uniform. But technology can't record hesitation, the fraction of a second when an officer's instinct collides with an assumption. That moment doesn't leave a file. It leaves an imprint. For the officers who remained, Otto's fall was a warning. Several quietly told colleagues they were now afraid to speak freely over radio channels. One said, "Every word feels like evidence." But community advocates saw it differently. They said maybe that fear was the start of accountability. Because if bias hides in the casual, then the casual has to change. Meanwhile, Otto's absence became a kind of presence. His name surfaced at workshops, in classrooms, in sermons. He was the example, the cautionary tale for rookies, the reference point in diversity training slides. Yet no one really knew where he went. Some said he'd moved east. Others thought he'd taken security work out of state. His attorney refused to confirm anything. In the city that once knew his patrol routes by heart, Otto became a ghost. Ghosts, though, don't disappear. They linger in conversations, in what-ifs, in the stories told over kitchen tables. For younger native residents, Otto's silence became symbolic, proof that consequences rarely come with understanding. They wanted dialogue, not disappearance. An apology, not erasure. Because to them, silence from authority feels like permission for everything to stay the same. At a youth gathering on the Pine Ridge Reservation, high school students discussed policing during a workshop on civic engagement. One teenager raised his hand and asked a question that hung in the air long after he spoke. If the officer just made a mistake, why does it happen so much? No one had an easy answer. Because the truth is layered, policy over history, history over pain. And none of it fits into a single explanation. Across South Dakota, small towns carry versions of the same tension. In Rapid City, it's visible. Elsewhere, it's whispered. Each community finds its own fragile truce between law enforcement and the people they serve. But truce isn't trust. It's just a pause in conflict. A local pastor who runs an outreach program downtown describes the divide like this. When an officer walks into a coffee shop, half the room sees protection, half sees danger. And both of them might be right. He shrugs when he says it, as though the sentence explains itself. Because here, contradictions live side by side. To understand the human cost of Otto's mistake, you have to see how small moments stack into lifetimes. For some, it's the extra heartbeat of fear. For others, it's choosing a different route home to avoid the precinct. For parents, it's explaining to children why they must be polite even when they're scared. Those are the quiet taxes of mistrust, unrecorded, unpaid, yet constant. Within the department, a younger generation of officers tries to change the narrative. Some attend tribal events on their own time. Some ask elders to teach them local history. One rookie said he joined the force because he was tired of hearing his native friends say they didn't trust the police. Change often begins with discomfort. And right now, Rapid City is deeply uncomfortable. Every story has its reckoning, but not every reckoning is loud. In this city, it moves quietly, through conversations at diners, through hesitant partnerships between activists and captains, through children who grow up hearing both sides and trying to imagine something better. That's the real cost and the real hope, a generation shaped by the mistake of one officer and the silence that followed. So the question isn't whether Rapid City has changed. It's whether its people can live with the weight of knowing why change was needed in the first place. Because the silence after the storm still speaks, in lowered eyes, in cautious words, in every small decision made between fear and faith. And somewhere beyond that silence, a new voice is beginning to rise. Every city has its echo, the sound that remains after the moment has passed. In Rapid City, that echo carries a question. What now? Months after the resignation, the conversation refuses to die. It surfaces at tribal councils, at school assemblies, in the careful language of press statements. Even when no one names the incident, people still speak around it, a kind of collective memory, suspended in the air. Across the Pine Ridge Reservation, community leaders say they still feel the ripple. For them, Otto's story isn't just about bias. It's about boundaries, who gets to move freely, who gets watched, who gets believed. One organizer puts it simply, we cross into that city every day, but it never feels like crossing into neutral ground. He's tired when he says it, not angry, a tone shaped by decades of repetition. The divide is older than any one officer. It stretches back through boarding schools, broken treaties, relocation programs, an unbroken thread of control disguised as protection. Policing, for many Native people, became the latest chapter in that same book. That's why one radio comment can reopen centuries of mistrust. It's never just the present speaking, it's the past answering back. Meanwhile, among Rapid City's civic leaders, there's cautious optimism. The Human Relations Commission has new members. Workshops on implicit bias now fill calendars that once held charity golf tournaments. Small things, but visible. Karen Mortimer from MOA calls it micro-healing. She says, you can't undo 150 years overnight, but you can stop adding new wounds. Still, she admits that every step forward comes with pushback. Progress here walks on eggshells. For Native activists, patience is complicated. They've been patient for generations. So now they balance two instincts, to build bridges and to hold the city accountable. One young advocate says she's tired of being asked to educate everyone else. I'll keep showing up, she says, but I'm not a lesson plan. Her words catch the exhaustion that so many carry, the burden of always having to explain pain before anyone believes it exists. And somewhere beyond the meetings and the interviews, Jeffrey Otto remains silent. No new public record. No re-entry into law enforcement. Just the absence of noise, a quiet career cut off mid-sentence. To some, his silence feels like guilt. To others, self-preservation. Either way, it leaves a blank space where dialogue might have been. If Otto ever returns to policing, the state will have to decide whether lack of judgment disqualifies him. The decision won't make headlines, but it will matter, because how a system treats its mistakes reveals what it's willing to learn. And if nothing else, Rapid City has been forced to look in the mirror. Local journalists still revisit the case in year-end retrospectives. Not because of its drama, but because of what it represents. A shift, however small, toward acknowledging that bias doesn't need violence to be real. In editorials, columnists write that the city's real challenge isn't firing bad officers, it's changing good ones before they cross the same line. That sentence stays with people, changing good ones before they cross the line. Because that's where prevention lives, in the gray area between thought and action. Across South Dakota, other departments quietly take note. Mandatory bias training expands. Partnerships with tribal police increase. Some chiefs reach out to elders for cultural guidance, not because it's policy, but because it's prudent. Small shifts, invisible to most outsiders, begin to accumulate. The state's conversation on race and policing grows louder, steadier, less defensive. Progress doesn't always look like celebration. Sometimes it looks like less denial. Back in Rapid City, summer fades into fall again. Tourists leave, the streets slow down. At the annual community dinner hosted by MOA, city officials share tables with tribal leaders. There are speeches, laughter, a few awkward pauses, but also genuine eye contact. It's imperfect, but it's a start. During one toast, a Lakota elder stands and says, "Maybe the Creator wanted us to finally hear each other." Applause follows, soft, hesitant, real. For young Native residents watching this slow evolution, the lesson is complex. They learn that accountability can happen, but it rarely feels like justice. They learn that change is possible, but it moves at the speed of bureaucracy, not urgency. And they learn that silence, while heavy, can sometimes be broken, if enough voices speak through it. Outside the city limits, night settles over the Black Hills. From the highway, Rapid City looks peaceful, a constellation of streetlights against the dark. No sign of division, no hint of tension. Just light. But inside those lights live stories, of officers reconsidering assumptions, of families daring to hope, of a city slowly trying to earn its own redemption. The fallout from one sentence has become something larger, a mirror, reflecting how fragile equality still is. And as that reflection lingers, a new generation of residents, native and non-native, begins asking a different kind of question. Not, who was right? But, who are we becoming? That question doesn't fit neatly into a police report. But it's the only one that might change the next one. Because the real reckoning in Rapid City isn't in courtrooms or council meetings. It's in every unrecorded moment when someone chooses to listen instead of dismiss, to pause instead of presume. Those moments rarely make the news. But together, they rewrote it. In the end, what silence left behind was a possibility. Fragile, uncertain, but present. A city learning that healing isn't about erasing the past, it's about hearing it without turning. The lights of Rapid City still glow at night, steady and unbroken, as if nothing ever changed. But inside the station on Quincy Street, something has. A new class of recruits walks through the doors, fresh uniforms, nervous smiles, notebooks in hand. Most of them grew up here. Some come from towns so small they don't appear on every map. And each of them carries the same question. How do you serve a community that doesn't fully trust the badge you're about to wear? Since the Otto case, orientation looks different. The slides still cover procedure, pursuit policy, and evidence handling. But now there's a new section, bias and community trust. It isn't long, maybe 20 minutes in total, but it's there. A start. One slide reads in bold letters, perception is impact. The instructor pauses longer than usual on that one. He doesn't mention Otto by name. He doesn't have to. Everyone in the room already knows the story. For the rookies, it's a ghost lesson, an unspoken warning about how words travel faster than bullets. They're told to be mindful of language on the radio, careful with observation, conscious of tone. Some nod, taking notes. Others glance at each other, wondering how something so simple could end a career. It's quiet when the class breaks. The new generation has entered a department still haunted by the last one. One of those recruits, 23-year-old Alex Dunn, says he joined because he wanted to bridge the gap between police and youth. He grew up near the west side, played basketball with kids from the reservation, lost a cousin to addiction. He says, I know both sides. He isn't naive, he's observant. He knows one conversation won't erase decades of mistrust. But he believes showing up matters. So he does. Alex's first patrol partner is a veteran officer named Rodriguez. Quiet, steady, 12 years on the force. They drive the same route Otto once took, through the commercial strip, past the hotels, toward the interstate. The air inside the cruiser hums with the radio's soft static. Rodriguez points out landmarks, shortcuts, the corners where trouble tends to start. Then he says something unexpected. You'll learn, kid, the hardest part isn't the calls. It's quiet. Alex nods. He doesn't fully understand yet, but he will. The quiet Rodriguez mentions is the space between action, the long, uneventful stretches where instinct can turn to judgment. That's where bias hides. Not in adrenaline, but in boredom. The department's leadership now repeats that idea in every memo. Stay aware. Stay grounded. Remember perception. It's repetition by design, hoping that habit can be rewritten where policy alone can't. Outside the station, the community is watching. Every traffic stop, every interaction, every headline feels like a test. Social media pages light up with posts dissecting police behavior. Some are fair. Some are not. But all of them prove the same thing. People are paying attention. For the first time in years, accountability has eyes. Captain Renee Black Elk, the department's new cultural liaison, says that's how it should be. She's Oglala Lakota and the first indigenous woman to hold the role. Her office sits near the back of the station, a small space lined with community photos and notes from school children. She says, transparency builds respect faster than apologies. Every week, she meets with tribal representatives to review outreach efforts and complaint data. Sometimes the meetings are tense. Sometimes they're hopeful. Always, they're necessary. Black Elk remembers when she first wore the uniform. People on the reservation looked at her like she'd switched sides. Now she spends her days trying to prove that sides can overlap. She tells recruits, you can't protect a community you don't understand. She tells citizens, you can't change a system by avoiding it. And in between those truths, she stands, translator, advocate, bridge. Under her guidance, small rituals begin to change. Officers now attend the annual Wasipi powwow as guests, not monitors. Patrol cars slow near ceremonies instead of circling them. It seems minor, but symbols matter. Because every respectful gesture chips away at a century of suspicion. Still, not everyone welcomes the shift. A few veteran officers quietly resent the scrutiny. They mutter that the city cares more about politics than policing. One even calls the new programs PR with feathers. But the leadership doesn't flinch. They know reform rarely starts with agreement, it starts with discomfort. Outside the precinct, the next generation of activists mirrors that same effort. At local colleges, indigenous students form groups dedicated to civic engagement. They host discussions about public safety, voting rights, and cultural representation. One student says, "We're not anti-police. We're anti-fear." Her words spread online, gathering support beyond the state. The movement isn't loud. It's consistent. And consistency, in the end, changes more than outrage ever could. By late spring, the new officers are on the streets, walking beats, taking calls, learning rhythms. For Alex, every shift is a lesson in perception. A glance that lasts too long. A tone that feels wrong. He catches himself constantly, choosing to listen before deciding. He's not perfect, but he's trying. One evening, responding to a call near a motel, he meets a man loading luggage into a car, mid-30s, native, tired from travel. Alex nods, offering a simple, "Evening, sir." The man nods back, wary at first, then relaxed. A small moment. No tension, no mistake, no assumption. Just two people sharing a second of mutual respect. But in a city still healing, that's how trust starts. Inside the department, Black Elk watches these interactions with cautious pride. She says the city won't measure success by statistics for years, but she sees change in posture, in tone, in how young officers introduce themselves at community meetings. She says, "We're learning to listen with our shoulders down." It's a simple image, one that says everything about progress and restraint. The department's body camera program now captures not only accountability, but training moments. Clips of calm de-escalation circulate internally, replacing the old myth of aggression as strength. Each clip becomes part of a quiet new narrative, restraint as professionalism. Otto's name never appears, but his absence shapes every frame. Meanwhile, outside the city, other agencies start calling Rapid City for advice. The same place once accused of bias becomes a reluctant model for improvement. It's imperfect, but symbolic. Because in law enforcement, reputation is currency, and Rapid City is trying to earn it back, one interaction at a time. At graduation for the new recruits, the police chief addresses the class. He doesn't mention controversy. He speaks about community, humility, and the courage to admit mistakes. Then, after a pause, he says, "Every call you answer will be recorded. The question is, what story will the footage tell?" Applause follows, soft but sincere. As the ceremony ends and badges catch the sunlight, one truth settles over the room. Rapid City can't rewrite the past. Change, in Rapid City, doesn't begin with policy. It begins with people, those willing to speak when everyone else is tired of talking. A new generation of native activists is finding its voice. They aren't angry in the way outsiders expect. They're deliberate, strategic. They understand that systems don't shift from shouting alone. They shift when the right words reach the right ears at the right time. Among them is 20-year-old Maya Red Cloud, a sociology student at South Dakota Mines. She grew up on Pine Ridge, raised by grandparents who still remember the boarding schools. She says her first memory of Rapid City was fear. "I was 10, she recalls. "We came here for groceries. My grandma told me, 'Don't stare too long at the police.' I never forgot that." Now she stands in front of lecture halls, giving talks on racial bias and civic engagement. Her voice is calm, measured, but it cuts through complacency like wind over prairie grass. Maya's generation carries smartphones instead of protest signs. Their rallies happen as hashtags, their speeches through live streams. They've learned how to turn pain into algorithms, and algorithms into awareness. When the Otto case resurfaced online, Maya started a campaign called #WeDriveToo. It featured indigenous drivers posting photos with their cars and stories of how often they've been stopped without reason. Within a week, The tag reached 30,000 views. Within a month, city council members were quoting it in meetings. Visibility, after all, is its own form of defense. At a community forum hosted downtown, Maya met Captain Renee Black Elk. The meeting was tense, part listening session, part confrontation. When Maya spoke, she didn't accuse, she asked. What does accountability look like when the hurt doesn't leave a bruise? No one had an easy answer. But for the first time, the question wasn't met with silence. Black Elk listened. Other officers nodded. And for a brief, fragile moment, conversation replaced distance. Moments like that are small, but they echo. Each one chips away at the wall between the badge and the community. The activists call themselves the middle generation, old enough to remember mistrust, young enough to believe in repair. They organize workshops for teenagers, teaching them their rights and how to file formal complaints without fear. They invite police representatives to speak, not as authority figures, but as neighbors. Sometimes the events go smoothly. Sometimes they end with tears. But they keep happening, and that consistency is what begins to heal. In classrooms across the city, teachers start including local history, the kind that never made it into textbooks. Students learn about the Wounded Knee occupation, about relocation acts, about how laws once turned identity into liability. They learn why a single radio comment from a cop could carry the weight of a century. Understanding doesn't come all at once, but it comes. For many non-native residents, the awakening is uncomfortable. Some resist, saying the past is irrelevant. Others lean in, realizing they'd been part of the silence. A business owner who once dismissed talk of bias now sponsors scholarships for Native students entering criminal justice programs. He says, if we want better policing, we need to help raise the officers who'll do it. That's how reconciliation begins here, not with apology, but investment. Maya often says she's not trying to tear down the system. She's trying to make sure it can't ignore the people it serves. Her tone is steady, almost journalistic. She learned early that calm carries farther than rage. When asked what she wants most, she says, consistency. I don't want outrage. I want follow-up. Her words echo the sentiment of a community exhausted by cycles of scandal and forgetting. They don't need grand gestures. They need permanence. The NDN Collective amplifies these young voices, hosting workshops and online panels where police officials sometimes participate anonymously. One anonymous chat comment reads, I didn't realize how many times I've misread situations. I'm trying to unlearn it. It's not a confession. It's awareness. And awareness is how silence starts to lose its grip. For activists, progress often looks like small contradictions. A police chief shaking hands at a powwow. A teenager thanking an officer for staying calm. A social worker calling dispatch by first name instead of badge number. Every scene looks ordinary. Together, they rewrite what ordinary means. Not all responses are kind. Online comment sections still split sharply, defenders of the badge versus defenders of the community. The arguments are raw, personal, and endless. But beneath the noise lies something crucial. People are still talking. And as long as the conversation continues, silence can't reclaim the story. By late autumn, Maya travels to Pierre, the state capital, to testify at a hearing on police reform funding. She's nervous. Her notes shake slightly as she reads. She talks about Rapid City, not as a warning, but as an opportunity. Change doesn't embarrass us, she says. Silence does. Lawmakers nod. Some take notes. A few avert their eyes. But the record now holds her words. And once something is in the record, it can't be ignored. In the audience that day sits Captain Black Elk. After the hearing, she approaches Maya quietly. They exchange a few words, a handshake. No cameras catch the moment, but it matters. Because connection, when built carefully, lasts longer than headlines. Across Rapid City, those small bridges multiply. Tribal youth programs invite officers to participate in mentorship events. Some accept. Some decline. but the invitations keep coming. In one photograph later shared online, a uniformed officer helps a group of children paint a mural downtown. The mural shows two hands, one brown, one lighter, holding a single feather. At the bottom, a caption reads, "Not the past, the present." The image circulates quietly, a symbol of cautious hope. Hope here is fragile. It bends easily under scrutiny, but it persists. The activists know setbacks will come, new incidents, new headlines. They also know they've built a network strong enough to respond. In a place where silence once ruled, that readiness is victory enough. The voices rising across Rapid City aren't loud, but they are steady. They carry stories instead of slogans, questions instead of accusations. And in their persistence lies the possibility that this city, long divided by memory, might finally learn to listen to itself. The Black Hills rise to the west of Rapid City, ancient, silent, patient. They've seen gold rushes, treaties signed and broken, and the steady hum of history repeating itself. Now, they watch a different kind of reckoning. Not loud, not violent, but deep. From those hills, the story travels outward. Other towns in South Dakota, Spearfish, Sturgis, Pierre, begin holding their own community meetings. Each one different in tone, but all shaped by the same question. How do we see each other beyond assumption? The Otto case is rarely mentioned by name anymore, but it hovers, invisible, like a lesson absorbed without being spoken. At the State Police Academy, instructors now include a segment called Cultural Awareness in Field Response. The examples come from real reports. The takeaway is simple. What you think you see isn't always what's there. Young cadets listen carefully. For many, it's the first time they've heard Indigenous history framed not as heritage, but as present reality. The course lasts 40 minutes. The impact may be longer. In Pierre, legislators quietly debate expanding diversity recruitment funds for rural departments. They reference Rapid City as both cautionary tale and model. Some resist, citing budgets. Others push, citing need. The conversation isn't glamorous, but it's happening, and that's new. Meanwhile, in Rapid City itself, life continues. The streets look the same, the mural downtown, the steady traffic along Main, the kids biking near Memorial Park. But something subtle has shifted. People greet patrol cars with nods instead of distance. Officers respond with small waves instead of silence. It's not transformation, it's recognition. And recognition is where reconciliation begins. On the reservation, elders meet with city officials every quarter now. They share coffee, not confrontation. They talk about road safety, missing persons, and mutual aid during storms. Ordinary things that used to be overshadowed by mistrust. Progress here isn't measured in applause. It's measured in absence. The absence of fear, the absence of assumption, the absence of that pause before speaking. Among the younger generation, the conversation turns toward careers. For the first time, local tribes encourage youth to consider policing, not as outsiders, but as participants. Scholarships appear, mentorship programs take root, internships open inside the Rapid City precinct. The badge, once a symbol of distance, slowly becomes a bridge. Captain Renee Black Elk says this is what she hoped for all along. Not perfection, but participation. She still faces criticism, still hears the whispers that reform is cosmetic. But she measures success differently now. She says, if I can get one more kid from Pine Ridge to believe this job can belong to them, that's change. Her desk holds a photograph, her new class of recruits, smiling in uniform beside tribal elders. Two worlds, one frame. Outside South Dakota, news outlets occasionally revisit Rapid City in think pieces about racial progress. Some frame it as redemption. Others call it a test case. But the locals know it's neither. It's just the work, slow, quiet, ongoing. Because real change doesn't fit neatly into narratives. It lives in gray areas, in small decisions, in moments when history bends just slightly toward understanding. For Maya Red Cloud, life has changed too. She graduates, begins working with a non-profit focusing on civic engagement across tribal communities. Her campaign #WeDrive2 evolves into workshops on digital advocacy and representation. Everywhere she goes, she tells the same story. Change started with a sentence. We decided what came next. It's both a warning and encouragement, and it resonates far beyond the hills. In interviews, she rarely mentions Jeffrey Otto by name anymore. Not out of forgiveness, but because the story has moved on. She says, "We're not stuck in reaction. We're in reconstruction." Her words capture the city's fragile evolution, no longer defined by what broke, but by what's being rebuilt. One summer evening, at the annual Unity event downtown, police officers and community members gather under string lights. Families eat fried bread and barbecue. Children dance. Laughter blends with music. It's not perfect harmony, but it's something better: coexistence. When asked how it feels to see this change, Black Elk pauses. She says, "It feels like a breath we've been holding for 100 years. That breath, collective, hesitant, hopeful, carries across the hills. It's felt in every handshake, every training, every young voice refusing to stay silent." For the first time, Rapid City isn't defined by its divisions, but by its determination to face them. And somewhere, far from the cameras, Jeffrey Otto lives quietly. Neighbors say he keeps to himself. No statements. No interviews. Just a man marked by a mistake that became a movement. He may never understand the full scope of what followed, but his absence left space for others to speak. And sometimes, that's what history needs: one silence to make room for 1,000 voices. The story of Rapid City isn't over. Bias still exists. Mistrust still surfaces. But the city has learned to confront, not conceal. To listen, not lecture. To respond, not react. That's the difference between denial and growth. And it's what gives this story its quiet hope. So when the next call comes, when the radio crackles and another officer makes a split-second judgment, maybe this time, they'll pause. They'll remember what one assumption cost, what one resignation revealed, and what one city chose to become afterward. Because the measure of change isn't in who was wrong. It's who's willing to do it right now. And here, beyond the hills, that willingness finally has a sound. Before dawn, Rapid City is quiet. The streets shine with leftover rain, the hills silhouetted against a pale sky. A patrol car idles outside the station, engine humming, radio silent. Inside, a young officer tightens his vest and adjusts the badge on his chest. Every officer learns early that the badge is heavy. But the weight isn't metal. It's meaning. The emblem reads "Protect and Serve." Simple words. But in Rapid City, those words carry history, the kind carved into memory, not stone. For some, the badge is a promise. For others, a reminder. Between the two lies a line that no amount of training can erase. Captain Renee Black Elk walks the corridor toward roll call. It's been a year since the Otto incident, and the department still feels the echo. New recruits have replaced old ones, procedures have evolved. But she knows policy only reaches so far. She pauses beneath the framed photograph of fallen officers. Below it, a smaller plaque honors community members who died in service. Firefighters, social workers, tribal leaders. Two lists, side by side, never quite equal in length. She touches the glass once, then moves on. In the briefing room, she addresses the morning shift. Her voice is even, deliberate. Every call you answer is someone's first impression of justice. Remember that. She doesn't need to mention bias. The silence afterward already holds it. For many officers here, the hardest work happens off-duty, learning how to see the community not as a set of reports but as lives. They attend language classes, volunteer at schools, sit through cultural ceremonies they barely understand yet. Each effort is small, awkward, but real. One sergeant admits he used to drive through the west side with his windows rolled up. Now he parks there for lunch. He says, "It's quiet when you just listen." Listening, that's what reform looks like up close. No ribbon cuttings, no breaking news. Just patience. And patience, as every cop learns, is another kind of courage. Outside the precinct, community trust remains fragile. Old memories don't fade easily. Yet, for the first time in years, some elders greet officers by name. A grandmother known for her sharp humor now waves at patrols that pass her house. She jokes, "As long as you're not here for me." Everyone laughs, softly, but genuinely. Its progress is measured in laughter. Meanwhile, inside squad cars, the badge's other weight lingers, fear of mistakes. Every word on the radio feels loaded. Every description is double-checked. Officers review footage of their own traffic stops, scanning for bias the way detectives once searched for clues. They know eyes are on them. They also know that's how it should be. Accountability used to feel like punishment. Now it feels like direction. For Captain Black Elk, this balance is personal. She was once pulled over on this same stretch of road by an officer who didn't recognize her in civilian clothes. He asked unnecessary questions, tone clipped. When he realized who she was, the color drained from his face. She remembers that look, not guilt, but confusion. That was before reform, before training, before conversation replaced avoidance. She thinks about it often when she addresses new cadets. The badge, she tells them, doesn't grant power. It lends it. And whatever is lent can be taken back. Every morning she drives the same route to work, passing murals painted by native youth. One shows an eagle wrapped in police tape that transforms into a rainbow ribbon. Another, a hand raised not in protest but greeting. They remind her that identity and duty don't have to cancel each other out, but they can, if left unexamined. The officers who understand that best are the ones who grew up here, straddling both worlds. Some are half Lakota, some married into native families. They talk about carrying two codes, one of law, one of community. They say they feel both gratitude and guilt, gratitude for serving, guilt for representing a system their relatives still distrust. It's an impossible balance, yet they carry it with quiet pride. On night patrol, when the city sleeps, those dual identities speak loudest. A young officer hears drumming from a community center and feels the rhythm echo in his chest. He knows he's supposed to keep driving, but he slows instead, window down, listening. He says later, "It reminded me why I wanted to do this. Not to police them, to protect the space where that sound can exist." That's what the new philosophy inside the department sounds like now. Less command, more care. But care takes endurance. Because every act of respect can still be met with suspicion. And suspicion, once learned, rarely unlearns easily. Late one evening, after a long shift, Captain Black Elk sits in her office alone. She writes in a small notebook she keeps hidden in a drawer. It's not a journal, it's a ledger of moments, small breakthroughs, apologies heard, complaints resolved. She calls it the wait book. Under tonight's date, she writes only one sentence: "Trust is slow, but it's moving." Then she closes it, exhales, and turns off the light. In a city where history once felt like gravity, even small forward motion is remarkable. The badge is still heavy, the line still thin, but the people wearing it are learning how to carry both with intention. And for Rapid City, that might be enough to begin again. Every morning, as the sun climbs over the Black Hills, Rapid City wakes between two worlds. One built on asphalt and ordinances. The other, older than borders, carried in story and song. For generations those worlds have overlapped uneasily, sharing streets, but not trust. Now, a slow reconciliation is teaching them how to breathe in the same space again. On the Pine Ridge Reservation, community organizer Elias Thunder Bear prepares for another outreach trip to the city. He's tall, quiet, and deliberate. For 20 years he's worked with families navigating the court system. He says, "Our people learned to survive rules written without us. Now we're learning to help rewrite them." When he drives into Rapid City, he always notices how the skyline feels different, sharper, more ordered. He calls it the straight world. At home, everything curves, roads, rivers, stories. In town, everything angles. But lately, he says, The angles are softening. At the same time, inside the police department, Captain Renee Black Elk hosts monthly listening circles. No uniforms, no microphones. Just officers, tribal elders, social workers, and youth. The sessions begin with a simple rule: speak to be understood, not to win. The first few were tense. Now they begin with laughter. Progress doesn't sound dramatic, it sounds human. One evening, Elias Thunder Bear attends a circle for the first time. Across from him sits Officer Alex Dunn, one of the new recruits we met before. They've never spoken. For an hour, they trade stories about growing up here. Different neighborhoods, same fears. When the meeting ends, Elias nods and says, "Maybe we're the same story told in two languages." Alex answers, "Then we should start translating." A handshake follows, awkward, sincere. A camera crew might have missed it, but everyone in the room feels it. Outside the city, that spirit spreads. Tribal schools invite officers to career fairs. Officers invite tribal students to the precinct for open houses. Children climb into patrol cars, turning sirens on and off, learning that authority can also smile. Parents watch carefully, cautious, protective, but they let their kids stay. Because letting them stay is its own kind of trust. For many elders, reconciliation feels like standing on thin ice. They remember the raids, the detentions, the nights when calling for help meant risking harm. They're not quick to forgive. But they also know their grandchildren deserve lighter memories. One grandmother says, "I don't forget what happened, but I want them to grow up remembering what's possible." That's how healing begins here, not by erasing pain, but by outgrowing it. Inside City Hall, Mayor Allender holds quarterly briefings on race relations. The meetings used to draw protests. Now they draw dialogue. Indigenous representatives sit beside police captains, data analysts beside community advocates. Charts and graphs fill projector screens, numbers showing fewer complaints, more community calls. It's progress, yes, but no one celebrates. Instead, they keep talking about what still needs fixing: housing inequities, court access, representation. Because in Rapid City, progress isn't the end, it's the invitation. The city's schools begin adding cultural competency lessons for officers working as resource deputies. They learn how certain gestures carry different meanings, how silence in Lakota culture can be respect, not defiance. Those small lessons change interactions more than any policy ever could. One deputy admits, "I used to think a student wasn't listening when they looked down. Now I know they're showing respect." That's a big difference. Big differences often begin with small corrections.